the show. We're back again. Nothing stopped us yet. And we're continuing with the long month of dragons. That's what we're calling it now. 6 weeks is the new long month. We're having fun here. Hi, I'm Noah. I'll be your host for the evening. And newbie for the week, Taylor, you didn't catch Dragonsong?
No, I 100% didn't.
You didn't catch the 1976 YA novel, the first of the trilogy, The Harper Hall Cycle, by Anne McCaffrey, and also the second or third book in the Dragon Riders of Pern franchise. I can't remember which.
Mine has it listed as fourth.
Oh. Like, in terms of publishing, I think it, like, started to come out concurrently with, like, the main Dragon Riders of Pern trilogy. But I...
Maybe?
Because, like, the events of the first two books in the Harper Hall trilogy take place at the same time as the second Dragon Rider book. It's sort of like all that is big stuff happening in the background. It's fun chronology, big universe stuff, all sorts of fun cameos from the main players, except this time, very little graphic dragon sex. So the younger teens can read this one.
What? Okay. I wonder why I didn't catch this. When was it published again?
So,
what, seriously, what year was this published again?
This is published in 1976. Although the copy that I have, that was my dad's copy, was like published in the early 80s. Like it went through several publishing things, and
I don't really have a reason why I didn't catch this, because like one of the things I recommended came out in 1978, and I've seen that 100 times. So,
like, I know it still goes around. I remember like knowing a shy nerdy reader, big into fantasy girl in high school, which was a lot of, I think, either our listeners or our hosts, really.
I was about to say,
who was really big into this series, and actually kind of when I mentioned it to my dad, he was quite surprised because, of course, at the time he wasn't letting me read most of the series because of the aforementioned graphic dragon sex.
Yeah.
Which I guess does.
I'm not
yeah.
sure how I'm gonna go with that.
Which does, I guess, bring me to the big question: how did I kind of first encounter this? And that would be my dad, who is a nerd. Just a massive nerd. So is my mom. But it was
Lucky.
him sort of talk. But since I was like a little kid, my dad would talk to me about the series because I have to assume that I was like first engaged by the covers, which if you're listening to the audio, you gotta go out and Google some of like the covers for the Dragon Riders of Pern series, especially some of the earlier ones, like for Dragonsong. This particular cover, which features the main character Menolly surrounded by 9 little fire lizards that are like just a big rainbow around her while she stands on the rocks and waves sweep up and she looks dramatically off into the distance and you see dragons in the background on the back cover. It's very like exciting fantasy stuff. So I assume I was like, "Hey Dad, what's that?" And he would just tell me a censored version of what was happening in all the different books and the stories and the weird, very convoluted status quo, which Taylor's still figuring out.
Your parents censored the stuff you read. My mom didn't.
I had the sensory parents. It was even worse when I was like a really young kid, but
oh no.
It slowly expanded away. There came a point where he just let me read this one because he felt like, oh, very little dragon sex in these 3 books. You can have at these, which is kind of why I felt comfortable sharing this with you, even though, as you said, it's kind of out of context.
It doesn't have a lot of context when it's the first book you're reading, but also I gotta talk about feminism and talking about this book, dude. But it's gonna happen.
You don't need to have too much context for this one because it's so focused on a character that's really
has no idea what's going on.
Yeah, she has no idea what's going on, so you kind of parallel her journey.
I wonder if you did that on purpose.
I mean, I was fun as I was reading to be like, oh, this sort of parallels what's going to be, Tiger Eye's journey as she reads this. and was also my journey reading this. You know, I had heard stuff from my dad about what was going on in the main series. He would tell me basically the same stuff I told you about the bigger players and what they were doing and what was all happening. But I was still, uh, relatively new to the first-hand exposure to the series when I read the Harper Hall books.
Yeah, that makes
Um,
sense.
I can't remember how old I was when I read these for the first time. I was probably in like late middle school. My like dad started let me start working my way through them. I think at some point I like hearing that I like tried to sneak downstairs and read some of the start of the first real Dragon Riders book, and it's a lot more it's more dense for a much older reading like comprehension level, and it was too much for me, and I couldn't even like secretly read it. It was just like, oh, I've got to back out.
You had the sneak to read the dragon books, just like Menolly had the sneak to try and read the letter that was written about her.
Oh, yep, that's absolutely. It was basically, it's all the parallels. Basically, we're both mentally, is what we're saying. That's going to be the thesis for the day, really. Some of us, different respects, some of us more than others, but I think it's just the real takeaway is that if you read this, you're the sort of person that would read this, you're going to be mentally.
You're
You're
gonna
going to
be
feel like
Menolly.
mentally. But we'll get to that discussion later.
Unless
So,
maybe you read the other books first and you know what the hell is going on. Then maybe you relate to someone else in the story a little bit more. Though,
yeah.
there's no other main character in this one, so I don't know who the hell you're relating to.
Are you an edgy teenage boy that also feels like a loner and needs a friend? You're probably feeling very Jackson. Or maybe you're
He
actually
has...
decent and you relate to Pimer.
His name is mentioned 4 times in the story. Jackson. I have no idea who the fuck this kid is supposed to be.
Very significant in the mainline books. And his name might come up again, maybe in the trilogy, or maybe not at all, because actually, if I recall correctly, there's basically a big time jump in his story immediately after the events of the scene that you see play out in this book as well. I mentioned how this book runs parallel to the same timeline as another book in the mainline series, so chronology is going to be weird. I apologize for those of you that are trying to chart this out at home.
You're apologizing. What about me who has to read it all out of order and context?
I don't have to apologize to you. You signed up for this.
Shit, I did. Okay.
So, I have only read this twice before. Once when I was a little kid, or maybe I reread it once. Maybe once or twice when I was a kid, and then when the COVID started and I like graduated and had nothing to do, suddenly I was like, well, let's see if I can still read, because I haven't read for myself since like high school. Let's
Yeah.
see what that's like. And then I burned through 6 Pern books.
You burned through 6 of these?
Yes.
Why would you do that to yourself?
They're fun. And well, I mean, the first one is hard to get through for reasons that we'll get to, because it was like hitting a solid wall of misogyny, pseudo-fascism nonsense. But
I do want to preface this with the reason why I say why would you do that to yourself is simply because of all the misogyny in this book. It makes it difficult.
yes,
It makes it very difficult.
Yeah. It's those books that like they like they pack at the front all the unpleasant stuff. You've experienced book like all the hard stuff is at the front. Like N.K. Jemisin does this with her it's not the Obelisk Gate, with the 5th season trilogy. Like the start of the first book and basically the first half of the first book is so hard to get through. It is the most miserable, the most depressing, the most child abusey like book I've basically ever read. Like
Have you never read I think the one that has the most child abuse I ever read is a book written by a survivor of child abuse. I think it's called The Purple Child.
I have not.
That one was really difficult. Okay, it's not called that, but it was a book written by a grown man who had like been abused his entire life as a child, and like it documented the abuse he went through. And then it came out that, hey, some of the stuff might have been exaggerated or he wasn't remembering it correctly. And then people are like, you have to believe victims, and it struck that whole conversation. It's a whole thing.
It's a whole discourse.
It's a whole discourse I had to read in high school For not even a class assignment, for an extra credit assignment.
I guess the net point I'm getting at here being that like these are books that definitely like front load all the unpleasantness to kind of set the tone for what will happen afterwards. Because even in just this book alone, tonally it takes a major shift up. It takes time to get there, but like things are looking really good for our main character at the end. And the same is true more or less for sort of the mainline Pern books, where it starts off hard, but it gets better at the end. But I don't know. Suffice to say, I started rough and unpleasant and worried that I wouldn't like these books when I first started that binge. Like it was very rough. None of the characters were nice. Everyone was kind of awful. The world was kind of awful. And I said to my dad, I don't remember this world being so horrible. And he's like, yeah.
See, that's why your dad censored it. Where my mom would just be like, don't read porn. Which she didn't have to worry about, because she didn't know she was raising an asexual child who wasn't interested. That was my censorship.
That's why we have to get to the White Dragon, is because you can see this whole story about, like, what I'm pretty sure is one of the rare, asexual dragon characters ever. Explicitly
Probably
asexual, and that is, like, an essential part of their character and, like, how they relate to the world.
Yep. I can believe it.
There's a whole lot of big gender stuff coming off of Ruth. Or Ruth, as Anne McCaffrey would have you pronounce it, because she's crazy.
There's a whole lot of gender stuff coming off of our main character in this
that is
book.
Absolutely true.
It's
big
like
gender energy off Menolly here.
I genuinely cannot tell if the author meant to bring all this stuff up or if it was accidental.
I feel like
it kind of has to be accidental, right?
Well, I think it has to be on purpose is the thing. Like so much of Menolly's main arc is like her straight up being like, I wish I could do the thing that I want to do, the thing that I'm incredibly talented at, the thing that I was trained to do, but I'm girl.
Okay, but first, before we get into all that heavy stuff, let's start with a fun topic.
Yes.
So,
hey, what? Yeah.
To give some context for this real quick, do you want to summarize it or should I try to? Because I don't know if I'm completely aware.
I've been thinking about this because the thing about Pern is that it looks like a fantasy book, but it's got, it's got
sci-fi.
Science. It's science fiction in the bones and the blood. It is deep sci-fi. It's very like, distant future, but also pre-industrial civilization, far from now. Very like, but I don't want to front load too much like heavy nonsense for the readers to figure out, because if you want like the full load, you can just go to Wikipedia.
So basically, what happens is humans try to colonize other planets. There's this disease called a thread that shows up. It's a red fungus that kills anything that it comes in contact with that is organic. Humans engineered some local creatures called fire lizards and made giant versions of them called that are basically dragons, which is why they call them dragons, based off of old folklore from Earth. It's 1,000 years later. Nobody remembers humans doing any of this, and so nobody even knows if the fire lizards or the dragons are actually related or not. And it's a point of contention in the story in and of itself. People who believe they are and people who believe they aren't get into arguments over it. Nobody remembers nobody knows anything about Earth or about the technology that has survived over the years or the technology they've lost. This story, though, follows the journey of a little girl who, wants to be... what is it?
It's a harper.
A harper.
They serve the multi-purpose function of, obviously playing music and, like, keeping musical tradition alive, but they also serve as, like, the history keepers, because that's how they recall, like, their essential lore in this culture is through music and teaching songs. So they're also, like, elementary school teachers that teach the kids the fundamentals of, hey, here's how the world works. Here's how people work. Here's how you ought to be.
Or how, like, original traditional storytellers would do it all orally, which is why a lot of original folk tales and, like, fairy tales come from thousands of years before they were written down ever, such as Beowulf and whatnot, because you just had the vocally share shit. which is why two different cultures can have the same story, but with two different, with like completely different character names and magical elements, but come down to the bare bones, they are the same. Because they may have once been the same before there was a departure. Sorry, this is my anthro side kicking in. I really love all of the implied anthropology in this book.
It's really, I love the world building in this book, especially. I love how, like, because the thread of the thread, and you summarize the thread really well, except that they're white, not red, but other.
It's called the red disease.
No, I don't think it ever is.
Is it on the if it's on a red comic, it said something about red.
It's on the planet that, like, the thread gets launched off of, the, like, dwarf planet that's running through this star system that Perna's in. It's called the Red Star because the planet is red, but the thread itself is silver. I
did not. Okay. I completely conflated the two. Oh well. This is my first time reading this book. I had no context. There's going to be other mistakes like this. It's just happening.
Thread as a threat.
Yeah.
Like, it's an interesting way that you were talking about, like you said, you know, the role of Harpers and the way that this oral tradition works is to, like, keep their culture alive, and this is how they do it in terms of, like, human interaction, but also the way that the thread of thread works does really excellent job of, like, forcing a culture that creates these long-lasting elements. You know, thread forces people to live in stonework and underground. Thread creates an environment where wood is a rare commodity because it eats through it every 200 years. The forests get consumed, basically, except for the ones that dragons are protecting, which is technically most of them, but still it's rare. Anyway, so it does like create this constant theme throughout the entire, like, world building of these ideas that are going to last. And building concepts that are going to last well beyond your life.
Yeah.
So that they can continue to serve their function and protect people.
And then you have our main character, Menolly, who has been trained by the local Harper because none of the men were available to be trained. None of the young boys were available to be trained. So she's the only person who can sing the songs and teach the classes while they wait for his replacement to arrive because he's sick, old, and he does eventually die. So she teaches the classes the entire time he's dead, and they wait on the replacement. And the moment the replacement gets there, everybody forbids anyone from talking about how she taught any classes at all because she's a woman and she's not supposed to teach or be a Harper.
Even her teaching at all was a big kerfluffle with her father, Yanis, who's turns out the sea holder of this, like, little port hold is what they use for, like, towns or villages that aren't, like, occupied by craftsmen or dragons. It's just the generic, like, common village term or city in this case.
Yeah.
Or
which is underground, and there's doors that block your entry in and out.
Because, again, everything's built around protecting people from thread. And so she lives in this, like, really conservative port town and has this really conservative dad and really conservative mother that are like, oh no, you can't be a Harper. First of all, you know, impractical. We need you to do labor for us. Like, we need literally everybody else in this town to do labor for us to keep, you know, things running. But also, you're a girl. Harpers aren't girls. You would disgrace our town if anybody knew that our best musical person and the person who was training our kids was a girl. So shut up. Stop making music. They hate that she makes music. They can't, like, that's the most disgraceful thing of all, because, of course, music is this big, important, ironclad thing that's involved in teaching people and maintaining their culture. And so, of course, if you're making new music, what's wrong with you?
You're changing the culture.
You're changing the culture. You're trying to add your own voice to it. You're just a small, like, youngest child of the family, you know, girl. Your views are not worth repeating and saving.
I also think we'll get into that later. I do want to touch on how a repeated comment that gets made about her thinking too highly of herself, and how that same thing kind of comes up with ᴗᴗᴖᴗᴖᴗᴖ, the replacement Harper, when he plays a new song.
Mm-hmm.
But that's her context. So
well, we've got a bit more story to get through. If you can.
Okay, finish.
I mean, that's a lot of context that we'll need for a lot of the discussion. But in terms of the actual story that follows, Menolly, um, well, let's see. A lot happens to her. She suffers a lot of direct physical abuse from her father on account of like her getting caught doing the thing that she loves, which is write music and play the music that she's written, because she's
Real quick,
really good at it.
a lot
Yeah,
of this episode is going to be discussing elements of child abuse, emotional abuse, and physical abuse.
yep.
So if you're sensitive to that shit, this is not the episode for you. That's this entire book.
That's yeah, this book, and it does, and relative to a lot of like YA books that cover these topics, this one does it with a relatively stronger degree of emotional gravity, especially as it relates to Menolly and her like immediate recovery from it. Like set aside long-term issues, just the actual like learning to be comfortable accepting compliments and being treated nicely is something that we have to spend time with her trying to figure out again. Um, and for good reason too. Besides getting literally beaten by her father when an accident happens while she's uh, working on a fish, she gets a serious gash in her hand. However, it doesn't do any serious damage, but her mother doesn't tell her that though, and in fact, her mother intentionally treats her wound poorly in order to leave her with as limited use of her hand as possible to make it physically impossible for her to make music. It is just horrible. She doesn't find out about this until later, and when she does, it sucks. Eventually, she does the only thing that makes sense, which is run away, get out of there. She flees. She ends up going to a small portion of the beach where she's been before, and she's seen the aforementioned fire lizards, creatures that people may or may not believe exist. She makes a home among them. Basically, she's got a basic camaraderie with them. She helps with a hatching, and eventually ends up. We didn't mention this in the context before, but when people bond with dragons or dragon-like creatures, it is a permanent psychic bond, an imprint that begins at birth. And by complete accident, as she tries to help protect these young fire lizards as they're hatching, Menolly accidentally forms a psychic link with 9 of them.
One of the, at least 3 are already hatched, and
Yep.
she already knows them.
Yeah.
6 are new hatchlings.
Well, no, 3 of she doesn't imprint on any of the ones that were there before they hatched.
I thought Beauty was the original dragon she helped.
No. Beauty is she tries to make it clear sometimes, but clearly she struggled to like convey it fully. But the old queen is different from Beauty, the new queen.
Oh, okay.
The she it's a tough delineation, and she tries to have like mentally explain that explicitly later on. But that is what's happening there. There is an older generation, and Menolly is now raising a bunch of these dragons from the younger generation. Menolly's living her best life. Turns out, with all these dragons fighting thread in the sky, it's actually not that big of a deal, so long as you have like a place to stick your head in.
Yeah.
So she's hanging out, living her best life. Meanwhile, the new Harper comes in, is like, "Hey, somebody, the old Harper sent a bunch of new songs that were written here to the Master Harper, and he'd like that songwriter immediately because whoever wrote them, he is really good."
Yeah.
And he goes nowhere. His investigation doesn't get anything done except get the dragon riders looking for her, which is good because Menolly finds herself out caught in the middle of thread and needs a dragon rider to come save her, but not before sprinting for miles and tearing her feet apart in the process. Um, Woof.
Yeah.
The dragon rider takes her to the local weir, which is the word for where dragons and dragon riders live.
Yeah, I don't know these.
Sorry. McCaffrey never defines her terms in text. She's always just like throwing them out there, which really sucks when it comes to the animals, because you just have to like extrapolate what an animal is from like how people describe treating it.
Yeah. No, that left. I don't understand.
Go, yeah.
There's a couple words that I don't get because she uses them as titles, but she also uses them as actions.
Like what?
Like, Morgana, move, you silly kitty. I don't know off the top of my head. Just keep going and I will pull it. I'll find it.
They bring her to Bendon Weir, where she is pampered, taken care of, loved, clothed, healed, and basically, given the opportunity to like finally relax a little. She starts meeting up with some of the women there. She tells them about her fire lizards. She helps get them in contact. Will help them find another nest of fire lizard eggs, because it turns out fire lizard eggs are kind of a hot commodity right now, because the dragon riders would like to, establish stronger connections with the holders, who are all, as we've established, very conservative and not very open-minded, and they're hoping that by connecting them with dragon-like critters, that should open their minds a bit and help them, take instruction from the weirs a bit better, because the weirs need cooperation to, protect the entire planet from a fungus that eats all organic matter it comes in contact with. Menolly helps there.
Kind of important that
while she's there and living her best life, she's struggling to get back in touch with music in her life, because while she was enjoying music with her fire lizards on her own, she's still not used to doing it with people. She gets to see a full dragon hatching, and that's sort of fun. People that she's met with go through emotional ups and downs, and she's sort of there for them and is beginning to connect to people. Finally, she ends up running into the Master Harper, who later on in the evening is like, oh, wait, that was the girl that wrote the songs? That was the girl that ran away that people were hunting after? They're all the same person? And if only Pet Iron had just told me she was a girl, we could have solved this earlier. And then he runs off, and then he recruits her and is like, hey, you want to live your best possible fantasy life? I want to give that to you. And she's like, yes, please. Sorry, I'm very bad at faking sobbing, men or women. It's just, it doesn't go well. That would have been my same impression if it was me sobbing, if in any consolation. That is just the voice I adopt when I sob. Ask my high school theater teacher. I can't fake cry. It sounds like a donkey.
Oh, man. That's sad, Noah.
Isn't that ironic?
Alright. Wait, how is that ironic?
I guess it's apropos, really. Just that it's sad that I can't cry.
Oh, okay. So yeah, that's the context. And before we get into all the super heavy shit in this book, we're going to start with a little bit of a fun topic.
Yes!
There's some benefits and downsides to it being impressed on, which is called impressed on, not imprinting, whatever. Being impressed on by a fire lizard, which are the mini original ancestors of the dragons that can be fucking huge. And again, there's upsides and downsides to both of them. So Noah, which would you prefer to be impressed on you? And yeah, you can do both, but in this case you only get to choose one. A fire lizard or a dragon?
Ooh, this is a big question. Context for the question, does this mean in Pern universe fire lizard or dragon, or does this mean in my real life fire lizard or dragon?
You know what? We're gonna do two sides of the question. We're gonna answer real life first, and then in Pern.
Real life, gotta be fire lizard. I don't have the logistics to feed a full-size dragon, and setting that aside, in either universe, a dragon is a full lifelong commitment, and fire lizards are too to some extent. But dragons are going to be your life partner forever, and going to determine, basically where you can live, how you can live, what you're going to be doing for half of your day at any given moment. And while it's it would be a lovely relationship to have, and the chance to fly would be incredible. Absolutely. I would love all of that.
You just need a few more fire lizards. You just need enough fire lizards to carry you.
To carry me into the sky.
Exactly. Make a swing, and they'll carry the ropes.
Yeah. Because that's the real thing. That's the big fantasy that these dragons present is constant companionship. And I don't know. I think I would in real life I would go fire lizard, just because it would be more adaptable to however my life ends up taking.
Okay. For real life, I would also go fire lizard.
Mm-hmm.
But not because I'm worried about having to feed a dragon or anything, or the lifelong commitment. Okay. The feeding thing would be difficult. Lifelong commitment, I don't mind. But the fire lizards choose you.
Mm-hmm.
The dragons don't.
To the same extent.
They don't choose you to the same extent. When the dragons are born, they impress on someone who is nearby, seemingly, and that is their life partner. And we don't really see a lot of personality from the dragons in this book. But the fire lizards get a lot of personality. And they get to choose more who they impress on. It's not just who's near them or who's there when they're born. You have to make a commitment to them and prove that you're willing to take care of them before they impressed on you. So if you get a fire lizard egg and it hatches and it doesn't impress on you, they'll fly off and they'll never come back, and you'll just have to try again with a different one.
Yep. And that really
I like it having that choice.
Yeah. And, you know, just to talk about it in the way that relates to the book, there's a lot to be said, and we've already said about how, like, conservative and empathetic a lot of the holders are, you know, personified by Giannis, Menolly's abusive dad. And there's talk about, like, when they're handing out the fire lizard eggs, like, you know, some of these people are just not going to do it. They have no empathy. They can't handle it. They couldn't impress a fire lizard if their life depended on it. Meanwhile, in comparison, Menolly, you know, who is, you know, literally, you know, getting beaten up by these people, who is so empathetic and so capable of, like, you know, making, you know, caring for and supporting other creatures, that she gets 9 of them, literally by accident.
Yep.
But, okay, so here's the real question, though, in the world of Pern.
Oh, still fire lizard. I don't want a dragon. They seem really boring. I haven't seen any of them present any kind of personality whatsoever. And you have mentioned graphic sex scenes too many times for me to want to risk being bonded with a dragon. That would make me super uncomfortable. Simply by the fact that, like, the writers also get turned on when the dragon's turned on, and I don't. No, that sounds like too high of a libido for me to deal with.
Yeah, I can see that. I would absolutely get a dragon in Pern universe. First off, dragon infrastructure exists there. They could help me feed that dragon, help me manage it. Also, just on a cultural level, like, it just seems like the Weirs are a lot nicer place to be than just about anywhere else on the planet. And I would much rather be in and amongst that culture than, you know, spending 50 years working on the boats in a half-circle seahold.
That makes sense, but I would say part of the reason why... Ignore the kitty. Part of the reason why the fire lizards are a better... Yes, he's fine. Part of the reason why that the fire lizards, I feel like, are a better choice than the dragons is... again, I like the personality of fire lizards more. They get to do stuff. They act like individuals, and you get to learn, like, become friends with them. But also, like, the dragons are really ruled by... Not gender, but sex, and the female dragons have a very specific purpose.
Especially the queens, the golden queens.
Yeah, and I don't... As a woman, I don't want to get stuck with a female dragon, and that's going to be their whole role. Like, I don't want to deal with that.
Yep.
Fire lizards, you don't gotta. You just get to have fun with them and take care of them, and you can still hang out in the Weirs. And help train them to send them to other people. I'm good with that. Let me just do what Menolly's doing.
It's definitely an unfair question for you, for sure, to, like, ask where you'd want to be in Pern, because it sucks everywhere for you in Pern.
It sucks everywhere. But hey, that's, like, literally most fantasy and sci-fi. Even if you look at modern fantasy and sci-fi where the main characters are women, it still sucks.
It is just the worst. It is just the worst. Someday we're gonna, like, have, like, popular fantasy that doesn't do that and feel obligated to make that a part of things.
Yeah, someday.
Someday.
For the rainbow. Okay, so the fun portion. That's pretty much it that we have for the fun portion. I really, really wanted to know your answer to that, because I wasn't sure which one you would pick. And as always, I'm predictable, because mine is entirely based off of personality of individuals.
I hope we get to the bigger books, because you do get to see a lot of, like, actual conversations with the dragons.
That would be cool. Right now, they're just horses.
Yeah. Right now they're horses that are, like, friendly and empathetic. Like...
Yeah, and that's not like to knock on horses, because horses also have individual personalities, which is more than what I saw from the dragons in this book.
Which does raise the other fun question that we didn't get to ask, which is, of course, what's the difference between a horse girl and a dragon girl? The answer being, we've yet to figure one out, but there's gotta be one, right?
Okay, I think there's one key difference between a horse girl and a dragon girl, and maybe this is because I'm definitely leaning towards one side more than the other, but...
Tell me.
Horse girls are kind of like cat girls, where they'll make the noises at you, or like wolf girls. Like, wolf girls howl at you, cat girls hiss, and they'll scratch you. Have you ever met a cat girl who got mad at you and fucking, like, scratched your hand with their nails?
I've never.
That shit hurts. Yeah, no. And horse girls neigh and get, like... really competitive about which of the animals show the most empathy. For dragon girls, know their animals are fake. They don't exist. And, like, in stories, dragons can basically be, like, people with wings. And so, I think that's a difference, because you're not going to have a dragon girl pretend to blow fire at you unless you're playing an imaginary game. And also... I'm gonna make the argument that because dragons are fake, it gives dragon girls the advantage of anytime you want to win an argument about what's cooler, a dragon or a horse, you just say, well, dragons do this and this and this and this and this, and then it's like 10 different books. You win. I would say those are the two key differences.
There's definitely a discussion to be had about the fantasies they both serve, because like you said, horses are real, but also that creates like a harsh line where like the difference between fantasy and reality isn't there anymore, which is why you can go and not feel crazy.
Yeah.
But whereas dragon girls, no, dragons aren't real, but also they're constructing like an imaginary creature that fulfills all uncritically examined aspects of their fantasy, including full human relationships, but also you don't have to care about the internal life of half of the relationship for a lot of these dragon stories.
Yeah, I disagree with that. I think that's why a lot of dragon stories disappoint me.
Yeah, well, that somebody has to want that, I have to assume, even if not us.
This one definitely did not go down that same trope, and I will give it that benefit before we get back to like our key points real quick. Menolly does care about the internal lives of the dragons. She doesn't hear their thoughts in her head or anything, but she does genuinely care about if they're happy and healthy, and she feels bad when she forgets to do something to take care of them, even if it's just rubbing oil on their scales so they don't get too dry. Like, she cares, and I appreciate that, because my biggest issue with, like, stories such as Aragon, which everybody knows Seraphina and whatnot. That is not her name, but I cannot remember off the top of my head. Seraphina is a different dragon book. My point is, Aragon does not care what she does in her free time. He's not interested in learning about her. And she's always getting vented to about his personal relationships with people. And she's like, that's cool. I wish I could have some of those, but I don't know any dragons. They're all dead, Aragon. Maybe I could hang out with people, but nobody has room for me. Aragon.
Oh man, Paulini, read some other books, take some writing classes, and then write your prequel series that we're all waiting for. Get on it, Paolini. Or better yet, someone that likes Paolini's books but wants to do them better.
His books are not that bad. I just feel like Aragon makes the same mistake that almost every main protagonist makes, which is where they don't have empathy for other people even though they claim to. Whereas Menolly legitimately does.
Oh yeah, she's big about. Which does bring us to insert musical riff here. Raving character corner.
It's Menolly time.
It's just Menolly time, basically all the time. If we have extra time, we'll get to like Elgion or all the cool women of Bendon, but it's Menolly time right now. This time is about Menolly. This is for Menolly. This is her time. This is her space.
Which she deserves. So,
she does deserve it. She's excellent. Which does bring us to the first big question I would like to ask. Menolly is excellent. And she has, at the same time, if you look in the abstract, kind of a very stereotypical arc for a lot of like main characters in stories designed to play to like young adult fantasies. Starts off as a small abused child with a special talent they're told to like not focus on, escapes from that abuse, grows a bit older and stronger, and finds that actually they've got something special going on about them and they should focus on that. And in the end, they get a world and supportive people around them that can help them pursue that passion in the end. It's been done a lot. It's big in fairy tales going back centuries, millennia probably.
Yeah.
But definitely it resonates the most with kind of contemporary self-inserty fan fiction style characters. And so that brings me to the question I kind of want to ask is, how self-inserted do we feel like Menolly is, and what fantasy is she playing to, and does she do it better or worse than most characters?
So, I know we touched on this briefly, and I'm comparing a lot of this book to other fantasy books I've read.
Yeah.
But I feel like Menolly is not as much a self-insert character as she is a traditionally written character.
Okay.
Because I can't think of the name because, I don't know, it's late at night, and I space out on titles, and I'm an English and anthropology major, but ask me to name any kind of theory, and I will forget what it's named, but I'll give you a perfect summary of it. It's true,
Names
I
of the
will.
theory books.
I don't know their names, but I can tell you all about them. But basically, she follows this traditional kind of writing where you're supposed to be able to... There's enough vagueness to your character that anyone reading the book can put themselves in that shoe and feel as if they are part of the story. It's what the writer for Twilight attempted to do with Bella, while also keeping her kind of 3D-ish. But in my opinion, Bella falls short because she's completely... It feels as if she's almost entirely without any other character aspects besides taking the reader through the journey itself. Whereas Menolly... Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, there is one sort of element that I think they do have in common, which is sort of another element of these sort of empty, self-inserty characters, which is this sort of abnegation. This, like, sense of, like, no, I don't... This denial of, like, a lot of good things that come their way. And that plays into a part of a lot of the fantasies that these characters are meant to serve. Like, not only are they supposed to give you everything that you want to happen to you, they're also supposed to make you not feel like a greedy weirdo for wanting all of the good things to happen to you. And part of that is having characters be like, no, don't give me everything. No, I don't want all of it.
There's that, but that's mostly to, like, keep readers from feeling guilty for having those ones to begin with. And I feel like in Menolly's situation, if there's anybody who's reading this book who's a survivor of abuse, they have every right to not have to feel shitty about themselves.
That's exactly
for wanting this.
Because Menolly, like, she does have that element, but she's doing it with a different emotional depth.
Yeah.
Like, yes, there are a lot of, like, wants to get and that people want to give to her, especially at the end, but she's got this emotion. But the reason that she's denying it isn't just like for the reader to play into some purity fantasy. It's specifically because of her trauma and how she's dealing with it. Like, her getting good things has always come with bad to her, and so she doesn't know how to react to it.
Yeah, and that is the key thing about her character, and what I personally really like. Because even though she is supposed to be this insert character that carries you through the journey, you also feel her pain. And even if you... I can't speak to this because I have experienced abuse in the past, but I imagine even if someone hasn't experienced abuse in the past, you'd be able to relate to why Menolly feels like shit.
Yeah, adds that. Absolutely. It is very clear, like, even in this YA book that moves at a really heady clip, like, you get the full arc of it. You very much feel the weight of how Giannis and her mother Mavi have, like, the weight that they've left on her and on her siblings to some extent as well, and the community as a whole, and what that sort of does to your sense of self, and what you feel like you're allowed to have and what is a danger. And
honestly, that's the difference between Menolly and Twilight with Bella. Whereas Bella doesn't really go through any abuse before she meets Edward. Like, she does go through some later in the books. I'm not talking about that right now. But she also doesn't really seem to seek out things outside of what is going to push the plot, whereas Menolly has goals and she has aspirations that aren't just about the plot.
Mm-hmm.
She wants to just have the simple joy of singing, which ties inexplicably into the plot, but it's not because, oh, we need to get her to this one specific location for the next story. It's just a genuine want and need of hers. And that's the difference between writing a character that could be a self-insert for readers and that feels fleshed out but they can still imprint on versus one that isn't. It's the small details that really add to it. And while the story has a lot of small details that I do not understand because I don't have all the context for it, I understood everything happening with Menolly's journey pretty easily. Besides some confusing words here and there. And it's... To switch topics for a second.
Sure.
Menolly has two very interesting journeys. One is her escape from abuse. And one is her relationship with gender and sex. Which this story does not see a difference between gender and sex.
This is a very bioessentialist world. We didn't get into it, but like the dragons have they have a bunch of different colors, but they're not like different subspecies or anything. They're like, you might more accurately describe them basically as being like 5 different sexes that the dragons can come in. 2 of them capable of producing eggs, 3 of them capable of inseminating eggs, all of them defined by color and, ranked according to like relative size and significance in terms of like what they do in terms of like thread fighting function related to their size.
As well as like which eggs can they have. Which colors of eggs can they have?
Which colors of eggs can they have? Only the golden queen can have any color of eggs. The greens have much smaller clutches, and they're only full of the lesser colors like other greens, like blues and browns.
Yeah. So there's that really interesting journey, and we're gonna get more into the gender discussion, but those are Menolly's 2 main character journeys, and one is active and one is passive.
Oh yeah.
And the active plays into the passive in a really well way that I think ties in perfectly, because the moment she runs away, the moment she is gone, and after she survives the first threadfall that she spends outside of her home cave system in a different one, she's immediately feeling better.
Oh yeah.
And that starts to have a shift on her view of gender, even though it doesn't change it too much, because again, this world is very tied to gender and sex being the same concept.
It's there.
But there's still that passive change where she's able to think about herself more positively because of it. Which, personally, if you're a survivor of abuse, the moment you're away from your abusers, you may not feel as great as Menolly did right away, but you're gonna feel better with time.
There's definitely a sense with Menolly, especially when she's back around in Half Circle Hold, and even like her like favorite mentor, Harper figure, the one that taught her everything that she knows, and only by his insistence was she allowed to learn all this harpering stuff. Was also kind of contributing to her negative views about sex and gender, which again, bioessentialist that treated the same because 70s. So 70s fantasy writer. It's not like there weren't trans people writing interesting stuff in the 70s. But anyway, the point being here is that Menolly has kind of been plagued by a sense of being trapped in girldom because it restricts like harpering, but also it just never fits right with her because she never fits society standards with girlness just on a physical level. The book repeatedly talks about how physically like strong she is. She's faster than any of the guys. She's really tall, like so tall that it is bizarre to everybody around her, and that is the main describing like thing that people use to describe her in a distance. It kind of if you're not paying attention, it could almost feel like in the same way that a lot of her other elements might feel a bit like tropey, bad writing. You could almost be forgiven for mistaking it as a sense of I'm not like other girlsism, but it's a much more like I am not like society's definition of a girlism, and I feel frustration and limitation by that.
I didn't even think of that because that never occurred to me.
Yeah.
Because I genuinely think her issues are not because she's not like other girls. Her issues are because she literally is not like anyone else.
There's no commonality for her. She's not like there's nothing really. I mean, she's not fully girlness as it was designed by there, but her masculine traits, at least relative to our world, aren't particularly strong in a way. I mean, in their universe, she is very like queer, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
She is interested in a masculine task. She has a masculine body, but she is still a girl. That is what she is, and there's no element of her that yearns for something besides girlness in any way that isn't just about getting access to the things that she already likes.
And even the people who like try to support her in spite of her being a girl is very much still in spite of that aspect, not
Definitely
despite it. And again, as you said, like her mentor Trio, I don't know. Pet Iron tries his best to support her and promise her dreams can still happen even if she is a girl, because he's written to the leader and if her music is enough to impress, then she can still do this, but he doesn't really seem like he believes it himself, and she won't let herself believe it because he's not even sure.
And he doesn't even like mention to like the big master harper that she is a girl because he thinks it's such an awkward thing and he wants to like keep it under the covers until
the master has already decided if she can join or not, and then he'll drop, okay, but she is a woman, by the way.
Yeah.
Well, not woman, she's 15, but she is a young woman.
It's very clear that even Pet Iron has got like all this nonsense in his head, and she's
She picks up on it because she is very observant, even if she's not able. That's another thing. She's an observant character who's done well because even though she's picking up on everything that's going on around her, she doesn't understand all of it because, again, she's a child.
Yep.
And that is so great!
Good writing of your child character.
It's a good writing of a child character, even if, like, there's so much misogyny and nonsense in this.
There's so much misogyny and nonsense in this book, in this world, in this writing.
I kind of expected her to go the generic trope. Well, not generic. I kind of expected her to go the route of fantasy woman character, fantasy girl character pretends to be a guy and then has to keep it secret from everyone that she's not a guy. That's what I was expecting, but she never tries to do that because even though she is very queer in the context of the story and this world by its standards, she is perfectly... She's not trans or non-binary. She knows she's a girl. She knows she's going to be a woman, and she's fine with that. The only issue she has with it is that it's literally holding every aspect of her life back. If it wasn't for all of the baggage that came with it, she would have no... Well, I would argue she would have no issue with her identity as a female at all. Or at the very least, not nearly to the same extent. But it's because there's so much of the social baggage attached to that it just drags her whole self-identity down. And again, this was written by a cis woman in the 70s. I do not believe she was trying to write like a trans-coded character, but the character itself does explore the expression of gender, or in this case, sex, in a very specific way that feels it's exploratory in that nature as well.
That's the funny thing about McCaffrey's writing, because just by dint of building such a stratified society where gender and sex and societal role are all tied into one uniform thing, whenever she writes a protagonist, who by nature of being a protagonist has to stand out and be in some way a defiance of the normal roles, she has to plug into queerness, and that becomes an element of other things too. I mean, we've touched on it briefly, and I'm sure we will again if in a year or two we ever come around to reading Dragonflight. Um,
We shall see.
we'll see. But these dragons that do like mate with each other and have this powerful psionic tele-libido link to their riders. Most of the riders are men, and a lot of the female dragons, in fact, most of them are also ridden by men. And so when they're mating with other dragons who are also controlled by men, it's never explicitly stated, and it feels like Anne has to write around this almost, because it has to obviously be the case that the male riders are definitely sleeping with each other. Like, that has to be the case, because when the queen is flying, her rider is sleeping with whoever is flying with the queen. Like, I don't know, there's a lot of these sort of surprise bits of queerness that just sort of pop up in these stories.
And I haven't gotten to that, so I can't
other stuff.
I can't add to that in any way whatsoever. But I feel like that ties into Roof and Jackson, who again, Jackson's only mentioned 4 times. Roof is only mentioned by name twice. And it's very poignant when
these characters, Jackson,
it's very poignant when Menolly is finally starting to feel comfortable around these people after she's gone through a long healing period where she spent a lot of time by herself, just taking time to be introspective and cautious and secure in a tight little area with her dragons, where she's just learning to be a person again around other people again. And it's really nice to see the story affording that to her and doesn't drag us through the whole thing. We get that there's a time skip and we see stuff happening with other characters passively while she goes through that inner journey, but we still feel like we've been on at least part of it with her. But even she's able to pick up that these people who have been treating her nothing but with kindness and sincerity since they met her and saved her, instantly turned their back on Ruth and Jackson.
Yeah, Ruth and Jackson, for context. Have we explained Ruth and Jackson yet?
No, we haven't. We brought them up vaguely, but we didn't really go into who they are. I personally can't really go into who they are.
Yeah, I'll give what the book gives, which is just that while Menolly is recovering at Bendon Weir, she gets to see a dragon hatching, which is a big, international, there's no nations, but global event. Everybody comes to see Bendon Weir and the big hatching from the biggest queen that's ever been, and, this massive eggs, and see all the new dragon riders, and oh, hey, there's a new queen egg. At the end of all the hubbub, there is one egg left over. It's this tiny egg. It's gray, which is not a dragon color, so it's just sort of left in the corner, and people assume it's a dud. But one kid in the front of the stands who's with some holder or other, presumably, some guy of significance, runs off into the field, says, hey, nobody's paying attention to this dragon, and basically tries to save it from this egg that it's trapped in. And he busts the egg open, and he cuts the amniotic sac, or whatever it's called for when it's an egg. And
to be fair, real quick, there is one fracture in the egg, but then it stopped moving. So that also added to everybody thinking the dragon died inside. Because there was only one fracture, and that, once he saw the fracture, is when he started cutting it open.
Okay.
So it wasn't just him, trying to bust this egg open out of, greed or something.
No. He's saving this dragon, and it plops out, and it's this tiny, tiny little thing. Tiny little white dragon. And dragons don't come in the color white. That's a weird thing. And he immediately impresses, just on contact, and tells everyone, his name is Ruth. And everyone who knows what's going on is devastated. Menolly has no idea what's going on. Turns out Jackson is the only heir to a very significant hold, and he can't be here because he's got a job to do already. And it looks like this highly stratified society is blundered once again by not accounting for queerness.
Yeah. That's basically what happens, and all Menolly can think is, why is everyone upset when they're so happy? Because her perception of the events is that they impressed on one another before the dragon hatched. And that's how he was able to know that the dragon was still alive inside.
I totally missed that comment because that's exactly what it is. I'm just surprised I didn't even notice Menolly mentioning that.
She talks about it right before she starts. She talks about it while she's also questioning why everyone is upset. It's one line. It's very throwaway, but I noticed it immediately because that is not even what happened with her and the fire lizards. Like, they had to hatch first, even though she saved them twice. And so that was really interesting. And I know it's in the book because I couldn't know it any other way. We did not talk about that.
Yeah, it had to have been because there's a whole like anecdote about Jackson finding this egg and like connecting with it before it even hatched. Like, so I'll have to. But you'll have to share that line with me. I'm very excited to see that.
My Kindle, I have a lot bookmarked, so I can't pull it up right off the top of my head. Sorry. I went through and highlighted a lot on my Kindle version of this book. There's a lot happening. But it was very interesting because she's immediately, due to her empathy, she's immediately pick up on these people who've treated her with nothing but kindness, immediately see this kid as an outsider. And she's kind of scared. It feels like she's scared about why, because she doesn't get it. And then right after, one of the older men who are around, who have been, like, helping her get to know everybody and carrying her because her feet are still torn to shreds, was actually a person who found her and rescued her and brought her there. Forgets that he made a deal to take her to the dinner and help her get there without her having to walk on her feet. And, he forgets about her. Yep. And right after she saw everybody who had, like, been kind to her before stare at this kid, Jackson, with contempt almost, or fear and worry at the very least, she's worried that she's also losing her place here, and that her and her fire lizards are going to have to leave right away, that they have no hope of being able to stay. Which means when she gets...
people have told her,
Yeah, even though people have told her that she could be here for as long as she wants, she has a home here now, she sees them turn on this other kid who's around her age almost, I believe, and she's immediately in panic mode, like, I'm gonna have to run away again. Which, you know, survivor of abuse. She's seen this before, and while she doesn't understand everything that's going on, she's able to put the pieces together, and she's ready to take the fuck off.
And lucky for her...
Lucky for her, they have a job for her. And she throws herself into that job because she's worried if she doesn't do the job well, she doesn't have a purpose.
And the next person that she runs into turns out is going to be her new pet iron, except even better. It turns out it's the Master Harper, but she doesn't find out till later, and he doesn't find out her significance till later. They just have like a friendly chat about fire lizards mainly. I know you keep reassuring me that he's gonna be better than Pet Iron, and that he's actually genuinely just wants to help her accomplish her dreams and goals. I don't know, dude. He made me feel suspicious. That's healthy. Like, so he's very nice to her, and he's playful, and he's getting along with her, and he's just being like this older, cool dude who's trying to help her relax because she's panicking because she was forgotten about again, which was a common theme in her past, in her old hold. Everybody forgot about her. That's how she was able to leave without anyone noticing for like 3 days or something like that. It was a couple days at the very least. It wasn't until after the thread stopped falling that they noticed, and it seems like the thread can fall for a couple days. At least a few hours, but it's significant. It ruins the day. It ruins the entire day, and no one leaves after that. But, it's that same fear, and this old dude realizes what's going on, and he's there to comfort her, and that's really cool. It's really neat. Great on him for doing that. 2 red flags right off the bat. And I'm not even going to consider the fact that he kept offering her drinks even though she said, nah, I don't want to drink because I get hiccups. Because everybody gives kids drinks in this world to calm them down and send them to bed. Wine is like your nap cap. Your nightcap, not nap cap. I don't know why the fuck I said that. Nightcap sounds like a DC comedy character. Oh my gosh! Maybe! That would be hilarious. His superpower is to put people to sleep. He's Jigglypuff. Okay, but like...
So I'm ignoring that. There's two big things. One, he doesn't introduce himself. He doesn't even try to introduce himself, and he keeps pushing her to explain who she is, even though she's not comfortable with him because she doesn't know him. But he doesn't know the abuse she's gone through. He's just trying to calm a panicking teenager. Okay, whatever. Kind of a red flag to me, but I can understand how that would be, like, normal in a writing. I can understand how that would be normal in the story. But the second one, the moment he finds out that she was the one who wrote those stories of the kid who they were trying to find for the entire story, he immediately wants her, like, to come to the school, like, right away. Yeah. And I know you said he just wants her to help accomplish her dreams because she's so skilled and talented, but right before that, it's talked about, as they explain what's going on with Jackson, that you can't be you can't be impressed on dragons and also be a harper or other jobs as well. So it really feels like he's trying to take advantage of the fact that she has lizards instead of a dragon, and he doesn't want to risk her getting a dragon, so he doesn't lose her skills. Because if she stays there taking care of the fire lizard, she'll probably eventually be impressed on by a dragon as well. Because there's several instances where fire lizards can impress on people who've already had dragons or had them in the past. Yep. And vice versa.
All the dragon riders, including, I think, Lessa, the headest of head honchos, look at her and they're like, hey, why were you never picked to be a dragon rider?
Yeah.
Like, clearly you're good at this. Clearly you have the skills. So I can see that. I think that makes a lot of sense to me. That certainly adds an extra urgency to his, like, okay, we've got to get her out of here, because I don't think there's any, like, ambiguity about how much he loves her songs, because that's why he was telling, like, the new Harper that had arrived at Half Circle to be on a massive hunt for her. But you know, back when they thought she was he. That's another thing. I do like how the writer plays with that sort of, you know, queerness of her by having everybody refer to her who doesn't know her as he. Like, even when they pick her up unconscious after saving her from all the running from the thread, everybody assumes that he's a he, and that's why Elgin doesn't realize it's her, because it's just some injured guy who's also being taken care of.
The guy whose name starts with T, who picks her up and carries her to the hold, he calls her he 3 times, and she notes every single instance, and it starts to annoy her because she's not a he, but she doesn't have the strength to correct him because her feet are bleeding.
Yep.
And she doesn't want to complain because she doesn't want to get thrown off the dragon because she got caught in the middle of a thread storm. And if she's not on the dragon, she and all of her fire lizards are going to die. So she just keeps letting this guy misgender her because she's terrified of correcting him.
It's just rough. It's just rough all around for her.
This poor baby girl. And I'm not trying to infantilize her, but, like, oh my gosh, this poor child.
It really is just rough to be this poor child. And by the end of this book, even me knowing that she's going to get all of her deepest fantasies, it's a ride to get there, and she's earned them.
She has earned them by far, and she didn't have to try and save the world to do it. She just was a nice person. She just didn't want she just didn't want the babies to die.
She exercised empathy, she pursued her passions when possible, and she survived. And those are sufficient.
She was able to figure out she was in a bad place, and she took the fuck out of there.
And she gets rewarded ultimately for that, which is ultimately excellent. Like,
this is a good character arc, even though, I wasn't expecting it to go this way.
There's so much, like, wrong and dark and unpleasant about McCaffrey's world here, about Pern. It really is worth taking a moment to pause and be like, no, this bit is good, though.
Yes.
Menolly getting rewarded for getting out and getting to a healthier place, and that just making her life better. That's awesome.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And how everybody respects her choice to not contact her old town, or they don't make her talk to her dad or anyone she doesn't want to talk to. Like, her brother doesn't even ask to see her when he realizes she's there because he's afraid he doesn't have the right to see her because he did not protect her enough from their abusive father, because he has no power against the person who controls their entire town. He could have got banished. Mm-hmm. He could have got banished or killed even if he went against him. So, like, the fact that he was able to identify that as well, I really enjoy her older brother. Mm-hmm. I really do.
Yeah,
he's trying.
He's got some roughness around the edges, but he's, like, nice and empathetic, and he understands that she's been dealt a bad hand, even as he has been to some extent as well, having to deal with Giannis as a dad, even though he is more or less thriving, in the role of a sea holder and, growing up to presumably, take a role that is the same as or similar to his father's.
Yeah.
He still's like, no, my sister's getting completely ruined here, and she's better off being either dead or not here.
Yeah.
Like,
and he doesn't, I really just appreciate, while there is rougher edges around him, and he does have the same latent misogyny we see in every character, even within Melanie herself, because when you grow up in a misogynistic society, you are not immune to it.
It gets
just
you.
Like you're not immune to racism when you grow up in a racist society. Like, you can't avoid it. But even despite that, he is also able to practice empathy and understand that he does not have a right to force her to see him, because he is not the person who can decide that. Only she can. Even though he loves her and he wants her to be happy and healthy. And I really appreciate that. And just the whole... Oh, man. There's just... Lessa. And... Okay, so...
Headest of honchos.
I'm sorry, can we go to the part where we talk about the misogyny in this world? Because there's a lot, and I know that we wanted to talk about other characters as well, but we're
running short on time. Let's skip a couple of sections. We're moving right into musical riff. Did you mean that?
Okay.
Where the name of the game is Oops, All Misogyny.
All of it is all the misogyny, and like... Oops. Noah! Okay, so, like, I was not able to highlight every time Lucinda was mentioned, because Kindle apparently doesn't have a search function for this book, but every time Lucinda is mentioned in the very beginning of the book, it's always alongside her partner, who rides the dragon that is the mate of her dragon.
Yep. Yeah, less of her context is the reason that the world is still around, basically. Like, they don't get into the full they do actually get into the full details. She is responsible for there being enough dragons here for people to survive. She is in charge. She has the biggest dragon that lays all the biggest clutches and is personally responsible for dragons not beginning to go extinct. She's in charge of the biggest, most important modern weir, the only modern weir. It is, without getting into more stuff, but she's big cheese, massive cheese.
And the town that Menolly grows up in refuses to acknowledge her as the leader of the riders. Mm-hmm. It's her partner who is clearly the leader of the riders, and he is why they are so great and good at protecting them. And anytime she gets mentioned, it's always alongside him, and then everybody pretends she doesn't exist. They ignore her. And while I was reading, I messaged Noah right away. I'm like, I'm sick and tired of this passive misogyny. Everybody's dissing Lucinda, and while I don't know her, I know she doesn't deserve this nonsense.
You get on your knees when you put Les's name in your mouth.
Like, fuck you. Like, there's so many instances where people are talking about how the writers are great and how they're amazing, and then they mentioned who's the best writer, and it's always her partner, whose name I don't remember because he's not that important, if we're being honest. Like, he's not that relevant to the story. And they always forget Lessa Zix. She's always an afternote. Something that gets mentioned, but you don't have to care about or actively think on. And then Melanie, and then
But you know who isn't in this book? Falar.
Yeah, her partner.
His name is. He's not here. Lessa's here, though.
Lessa's here.
Is vary here. There is a whole parade of excellent, wonderful, loving, and supportive women that come out of the woodworks at Bendon to get Menolly together, to heal her physically, emotionally. That some of them are just straight up like, man, I hope you hang around so I could be your foster mom.
Yeah.
Straight up say it to her, like, I want to be your foster mom.
How old are you? How old are you? Oh, I'm 15 turns, which is a turn is a year. And she's like, damn, you won't be fostered for long. Fuck. Well, I hope you stick around because I would really like to get to know you better.
It's like endless parade of all these wonderful women, you know, capped off by Lessa, you know.
Who is the queen.
The queen, and who has also got her own queerness going on because she is the most powerful, the most important person, but she is also a woman, and this is the first thing Menolly says about her after, like, being shocked by seeing her. Not tall at all.
She is,
in fact,
very short.
Remarkably short. And and the first thing that a writer says to her after Menolly says she's short, immediately ᴗᴗᴗᴗ is like, yeah, size doesn't matter. Size is not important.
ᴗᴗᴗᴗ is the guy who brings Menolly in and was the one who kept misgendering her at the beginning. But the moment she does explain that she goes by she, her pronouns, he stops. He is not an asshole. He's just also has latent misogyny going on.
With the exception of when he outed her backstory to the Master Harper.
Yeah, no, that was kind of shitty.
But, you know,
it worked out.
Possible exception to that, he is just her excellent dragon rider best friend. And
yes.
Anyway, Lessa comes in and like has this wonderful conversation with her. Please tell me what your thoughts were on this conversation with Lessa.
Okay. So like, here's the thing. I wasn't expecting Lessa to be in the story until Noah just said, keep reading. She has a scene and she leaves an impression. So I'm going in like, oh my gosh, they're going to make her a bitch. Oh my gosh, they're going to make her a bitch. She's going to be awful. She's going to tear Menolly down and tell her how horrible she is and how unworthy she is to be there. And I don't want to get to that. And then I got to it and it wasn't that at all. So
yeah.
Like, is the next book we're reading also about Menolly?
Yeah, we'll get it. Yeah. The Menolly is the star of the first two Harper Hall books, and she's still got like a minor presence in like the B plot. Well, no, she's a major presence. She's a presence in the B plot of the third book.
Okay.
The third book is about like her main Harper friend that she makes when she gets to the Harper Hall in the next book.
Okay.
But the first two books are just about her. The second book is basically just, and now you've got to get used to going to school, surrounded by guys, but also being in a weird special position and also having to take care of your fire lizards. And, you know, obviously there are going to be a lot of social issues that come up with being that.
You're going to be super stressed, kid. So, considering how the only thing you've ever done in school before is teach it to little kids.
It's rough.
Good luck.
It's rough for her. She has a lot to get through, but things go well for her because this is Menolly, and you know, McCaffrey takes care of her.
She deserves good things.
She deserves good things, and you know, I don't feel like too concerned about telling you she gets good things.
That's really reassuring because I'm not gonna lie, I'm so used to reading stories where like the main female characters don't get good things until like the very last chapter of something. And I was already super like happy that she got a couple chapters around these great people who love and care of, well, not love yet, but who care about her enough to try and help her out. But given enough time, I feel like they would totally all adopt her.
They're all that good. They're all that nice.
The Sim is amazing, and misogyny in the world sucks ass.
Yep. The women that we meet are Lessa. Her conversation with Lessa. That is where we were at.
So, like, I originally really expected Lessa to be a bitch because you said that stuff, and then we meet her, and she's not. She's aggravated and irritated, and she doesn't really like the fire lizards, but they annoy her dragon, who takes up so much space because she's a goddamn golden queen. And they're apparently overly large. Like, they're I don't know. The way you described it before is that the writer couldn't settle on a size for them, so they just keep growing bigger before they shrink down in the books, I guess.
Well, yeah, there's never, like we've seen with like even the regular animals, there's never much in the way of like a specific size given for how big she is, and sometimes it seems like she's smaller than that she's been implied at other times, like and in like some of the extra books, McCaffrey will describe her as being like the size of, these big old, BC-17s or whatever they're called, B-17s, I think, just massive cargo jets. And then later on, when someone was like, "Do you have any idea how big that is?" She was like, "Okay, maybe that was a bit too big." The point being is that Ramuth, there's a massive amount of size difference between the different dragons, and Ramuth
Yeah.
is the biggest dragon that ever did be a dragon.
And the fire
And
lizards are about like this big, and they annoy
well,
the shit out of her.
that being relative, they're actually about cat-sized.
Eh.
Some larger than that.
The point
But,
is,
cats get larger too, so.
the small dragons annoy her dragon, and so Lessa is annoyed and on edge because of the hatching that's about to take place, and her dragon's upset, and because they share an emotional connection, she's upset. But despite all of that, she's able to be really nice and understanding of Menolly, and that is great, and I love that. And yeah, she's upset, but like, I can't blame her. That all sounds stressful as fuck.
She's got a lot on her giant dragon plate.
Her main thing is like, "Oh, you are impressed by nine fire lizards? They're not dragons, but that's more than any of us have been able to do." And she's genuinely impressed by Menolly and isn't there to like make fun of her in any way or put her down. And while she isn't the most like maternal figure, she's not supposed to be. She's got too much to try and help this kid out. So like, she's put in the hands of all the other dragon riders that are there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just adorable. Minora is one of them, and she gets so protective of Menolly that when she hears some of the guys talking about her, the Master Harper and Elgion, she's immediately like, "What the fuck you want with her?" And she won't let them try and go see her until she gets the full story of why they want to talk to her. She's like super protective mom right now. And I love it.
No, you're not going any further. We're going to have this discussion right here and right now.
Yeah. Although there is something that really pisses me off, and it's that, again, with all the misogyny in this world, there's an instance where after they discover that Menolly is missing and has been missing for a while, someone blames her mom. The sentence literally says that Mavi misses the implied neglect directed at her by this guy who works under her husband, who blames her for not being able to take care of her kid enough that her kid wouldn't go missing. Yeah. But the whole thing is, the whole town ignores this one particular child. Everybody works together to take care of everyone else but Menolly. And yet it's all just placed on her mom's fault. And she has to bear the brunt of it. And it's ridiculous. And Mavi's not a good person. She's not a good mother in any respect. Or a good person. Mother. But, like, she still doesn't deserve all the blame.
No, absolutely not.
It's Yennis's fault just as much as it's Mavi's. Like, I'm not gonna lie. They're both awful.
It's very, but there's definitely that just weird cultural trend of blaming Mavi, and nobody except people that are in the family point out, no, it's him. Giannis is a primary instigator of this. Mavi is just sort of going with whatever he says.
He's a dick. And then even when people outside of the family tried to like criticize him, did you notice that she defends him anyways because she has to, because that's her husband and leader of the town? And if she badmouths him, then they're gonna tell him that she badmouthed him. Even the other women. She's like as trapped as Menolly was in this situation, because that's what happens when you have misogynistic societies and women don't get to be independent. It bugs me, okay?
It's a thing. It's the thing, and it's the thing throughout this whole society. Luckily, Menolly gets what she deserves.
She escapes to a degree.
Yep. So now that we've covered a lot of fun stuff, a lot of cool stuff about this, I gotta say, I really enjoyed reading this book again. And certainly after having all this discussion, just, as the host, thinking about this, having gotten to bring this and run it through our um, paper shredder-like method of analytical study, I say that there's still a lot of fun stuff left over here, sorting through the pieces as I am. I like, like we've said, I like what goes on with Menolly. I think that she serves as an interesting, like, opportunity to examine not only what fantasies a sort of a dragon book is trying to offer to a young reader, especially a young girl reader, but also ways to offer those fantasies while also accompanying it with a full and complete character that is doing, that has three dimensions, that has trauma and has issues to deal with and deals with them. Menolly is about as close as I've seen to having your cake and eating it too when it comes to these characters. She is well written. She is well handled. She is a well designed character, especially in the place to be placed in this world. She intersects with a lot of interesting themes and elements that tie into the core of what Pern is in ways that just a basic Dragon Rider character couldn't ever really do.
So, real quick before I give my review of it.
Yeah.
Be honest, is part of the reason why you really like this book is because you love small stories that take place in gigantic universes with overarching large stories happening in the background? Because I know we've talked about this.
We've talked about this before, and it's always fun. I always like it. I'm a sucker for these stories, and this is... I'm sure that there are other books that do this even better. I really would like to read the... I can't remember. There is one book that I know my dad has a copy of that it looks to be about a bunch of people that have no hold, that are just holdless people wandering about Pern and traveling caravans, a thing that shouldn't exist now that Threadfall is a thing. So I don't know where that falls in the timeline. But I am... Whenever I read these books about the big important people, or I see these stories about the big important people, so whenever I read these books about the big important people, I always get confounded. Nowadays, feel this big frustration, like, yeah, the big important people are interesting, and the worlds that you construct may themselves be really interesting, but I would like to hear about the common people, because those are most of the people, and they're the people that are going to suffer the most, and they're the people who are going to be the most connected to the world as you've built it, and we're going to see a lot. They're just the stories that I find more empathetic at this point in a lot of ways, and that's not why I came to this book first. It's not why I have, a deeper connection with this book than the rest of Pern, but it is part of why I think it stands out and why I'm glad that she wrote it, and I have to assume part of why she wrote it.
Personally, I always like the stories about the common folk more than the giant overarching hero stories. I want to know about the minor characters that are in the background and how they go about their daily lives. That's just part of me, because I really like seeing how society affects individuals on an individual level instead of the heroes who break all the society methods. Yeah. I also feel like you kind of need the overarching big hero story to be able to branch off on the smaller ones so people stay interested in them. And that's like an easier way of introducing your world and what's going on in it, by having a giant story with a main hero where you can explain everything and then having smaller stories break off from it. And I feel like that would definitely have helped me understand this book more. But
definitely, it's hard.
Still
it's like
so good.
One is your first Star Wars movie. It's rough. I don't discount the roughness of it.
But even despite that, I really enjoyed it. And while, yeah, it was really depressing to read at the start, very depressing to read at the start, I can forgive...
Incredibly depressing to read at the start.
I can forgive that beginning, because it doesn't fall into a lot of harmful tropes where Menolly has to forgive her abusers. She has to associate with them again because she has to forgive to move on. It's
never
not...
sees them again.
She never. That's not what has to happen for someone to heal from abuse. And that personally was my favorite part of the story. I hate that. I hate it when people have to forgive their abusers in order to be able to move on emotionally with their own lives, because I feel like that's bullshit. Yes, some people do feel that need, but not everyone does. And you shouldn't always just... That should not be the only representation in media of abuse survivors. Just saying. Family can also be abusive, and you're allowed to escape from them.
So, your net review then, because
it's really good, and I would recommend it. I love this book, and I can't wait to read more from her. And thank you for introducing it. Thank you for watching the video. If you liked our discussions on Dragonsong, the novel by Anne McCaffrey, please subscribe to support our channel. Likes are wonderful and greatly appreciated too. If you want to see these episodes get made before they go up on YouTube, you can find our Twitch channels in the description below. We record the episode on both channels at 9 p.m. EST on Tuesday nights. So, have you guys ever read Dragonsong? And if not, will you after watching this video?